50 people on this call, which is great. That's more than we had anticipated, which we're excited about. So let's get into this presentation. Let's get going here. So today is a class on HTML and CSS for beginners. This is very much beginners. So if you don't know what HTML or CSS is, you're in the right place. If you do know what HTML and CSS is, and you even maybe know how to use those tools, or you understand them a little bit, this is definitely a great refresher. I'm going to talk about a lot of the fundamentals. So if you learned it from like a blog post, there may be something missing that you haven't learned yet. So it's still really valuable to be here and to watch this and to interact. We also will be writing code together during this time. So you're not just going to sit and listen to me talk. I'm also going to show you my code, and I'm going to encourage you to type along with me. And by the time you're done, you're going to have a really basic, think of it like an about page. So the idea is like your name, a photo, a description of yourself, maybe linking to your LinkedIn and some sort of social media profile. And so you have just a basic understanding of how a website is put together. Okay, so that's sort of the game plan. And I'll go over a full agenda here in a few minutes. So welcome. We're going to have some fun with this, okay? But before that, I do want to introduce myself and my partner, the person that's helping put this event on. So that is Harmony. Harmony, why don't we stop sharing for a second, and why don't we like see your face, right? I can pin you, yeah. So just say hi, just say who you are and why you're here.
Hi all, great to meet you all. So quick intro, I am the operations manager for our Kennesaw State campus. So we are launching a new version of our Flex program in partnership with the College of Professional Education at Kennesaw. So that's what I'm here for. And ultimately, you know, as soon as the student reaches out all the way through becoming an alumni, that's kind of my wheelhouse. So great to meet you all.
Thanks. All right, so that's Harmony, and my name's Josh Medeski. I am a full-time instructor here at DigitalCrafts. I'm in the Houston location, so I live in Houston, Texas. And of course, as many of you know, working from home, as most of you probably are as well. And trying to. So interesting enough, I am also building out a more formal curriculum for the company. So I'm also a writer, a technical writer as well, which I enjoy doing. So, so that's a little bit about me. I am full stack developer. I've been programming for almost 10 years now, if you can believe it, professionally. So I'm getting close to 30 and I've been coding since I got out of college, and I love it. Manage teams. I spent a lot of time in front-end development. So before this, I was a graphic designer and a web designer. So I have a background in all sorts of different things and have been in this industry for quite a bit now, and really enjoy being able to teach people this and introduce them to computer programming. It's just a passion of mine to teach and to help people learn about computer science. And so I'm glad to be here. So I've broken down the agenda a little bit more for us. The first section, we're going to talk about how to structure a web page using HTML. Then we'll move on to how to style a web page using CSS. Then after that, we're going to talk about how to manipulate a web page using the inspector. And you don't have to know what that is yet. We'll go into it later. But it's a really cool way to interact with an existing web page. And then, oh man, I lost an image. That's okay. It was Stitch playing the ukulele. We are not going to be writing JavaScript today, okay? So if anyone came with that expectation, just know that I won't be writing any JavaScript or teaching any JavaScript today. But there's lots of opportunities to learn JavaScript, and if you're interested, we can talk more about it. We also aren't going to talk about how to use WordPress. So there's like a lot of like tools on the web, and some of them you may be familiar with. And if you don't know what WordPress is, it's okay. But we're not going to go into any like tools. We're just going to talk about the languages themselves. So this will be really fundamental, really basic stuff, but really powerful stuff, okay? We're also not going to talk about hosting. So I know that that's a big step. So I'm going to give you a website at the end of this. You're going to have a little project, like a mini one-page project that you'll be done with. I'm not going to give specific instructions on how to publish that onto the web so that others can see it. There are great resources out there, and it's not too terribly difficult to do that. And so I just want to set that expectation. And finally, we're not going to play the ukulele. I have a ukulele we could learn, but I think this will better serve our time by learning to code. Okay, so sort of stay on track here as best we can. But I do want, please, please, please ask questions. So again, you can use the thumbs up, the hand raise feature, and I'll do my best to keep track of that, although I can't see all of your faces or your images all at once because there's just too many of you. So we'll do our best, and I don't mind backtracking every now and then if I pass something and a question was asked, okay? So don't feel that it's too late to ask a question, okay? And thankfully, there's a lot of us, so we have the opportunity to learn from each other as well, is what I'm hoping. All right, so make sure you ask questions. And I did mention these tools, but I have to mention them again. Otherwise, you won't be very successful in our time together. So let me continue to check on our chat to make sure we're doing good. Yeah, so we do want to make sure that you have Google Chrome installed, because the part where we inspect websites, that section about 3/4 in, it's going to be important that you use this browser because the other browsers all do it differently. So again, if you want a one-to-one comparison of what to do, right, as you learn, Google Chrome will be the best, all right? And you'll also need Visual Studio Code. Both of these, of course, are free. All you have to do is go to the links and download them. They were linked earlier in the chat, but they're pretty easy. You can just Google both of these things and they'll show up at the very top. In Visual Studio Code, you do specifically want to mention code because there is a very expensive piece of software called Visual Studio, and it's unrelated. It's a different piece of software, okay? So you want to have both of these things downloaded as we start going. And you'll know when we get to it, because I'll tell you how to do it, and we'll see my screen as I go into it. All right, so let me take a deep breath. Are we ready to get started? We're ready to learn. Yes, yeah. Excited for this, yeah. I'm excited, maybe not as excited as that dog, but I'm excited. All right. So if you remember how these all things go, right? The first thing, I didn't mention the agenda, but I want to talk about for a second how the web works, right? It doesn't work like this picture. If anyone knows this show, bonus points to you. It's called the IT Crowd, right? The internet is not a box. It is not just some esoteric thing that just sort of happens, right? It's basically, the best way to describe it is it's computers talking to each other. That's all it is. It's one computer telling another computer something, okay? But if we broke this down into steps, I can tell you that all of these things happen within the browser. So it doesn't matter if it's Google Chrome, or if it's Safari, or if it's Internet Explorer, or Edge, or Brave, or Dolphin, or Opera, or you name them. I could keep going, right? I'm a web developer. I know all the browsers. There's so many browsers, but they all basically do the same thing. All right. What it's doing is, the first step is that you request a site, something like google.com, right? We probably go to that site every day. At least I do, right? So you go to the website. But what people don't know is that before you actually go to the website itself, we have to find the server using the DNS. So a very brief explanation of this is, it is the domain name system allows us to type in google.com, right? That's like an English word now, or it's a word we all know now. you type in the words and it finds the server. So remember how I told you it's one computer talking to another. So in this case, when you type google.com, we need to go, let's just be a little bit practical in my example here. This isn't a perfect explanation, but let's say, okay, we need to go to, our computer needs to go find a specific server in California where Google exists, right? And find the website itself and then do the rest of the processing. Okay, so what happens after that is your computer downloads files from the other computer. Okay, and after that happens, the browser processes the files that are downloaded. So in this case, today we're going to talk about HTML and CSS. And all that HTML and CSS is, at the end of the day, when it's all put together, is it's just a file, like an HTML file. So it's sent to us, and our browser goes, yep, I know what HTML is, and it loads it. And then if there's CSS, it goes, yep, I know what CSS is, and it loads it. And so finally, after it processes everything, it shows you the output of that code to the user, right? Because we don't look at code when we go to websites. We look at the final product. Okay, so you'll notice in today's exercises that we're going to go kind of under the hood, right? And by under the hood, I mean we're going to be writing code that our users won't really ever see, right? This is the job of a developer. This is my profession. I make things with code in a certain way so that you, when you go to the website, you can interact with it, you know, very easily. And you can, let's say it's like a social media site, right? You can create posts on Facebook, you can upload images to Instagram, right? You can do all of these actions and steps because of the code that's underneath it. All right, so we're just gonna scratch the surface here. All right, and then we repeat. So every time you go to a web page, not just a website, but every time you go to a web page. So if we go to Google, it loads, it goes through all five of these steps. And then when you type in what you want to Google and you hit enter, it takes you to another page, the results page, and it requests the website, finds the DNS location, downloads the files to your computer processes it, and then it shows the results. And what's amazing about this process, I know I'm spending a few minutes talking about it, is all of this happens in fractions of a second, right? The better the internet connection, the faster that these steps happen. All right, so all of this is happening over and over and over, especially now that we're all at home, millions and billions and trillions of times a day across the globe. And it's just extraordinary to me that humans have been able to figure out how to do this, right? And so it is quite an achievement. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit and just kind of open your eyes to the technical thing that's happening underneath, all right? But thankfully, we're not gonna set up any servers today. We're not gonna talk about processing. There's no need for us to process anything today. And the downloads themselves happen automatically, all right? And so we'll go into our first language. So HTML it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it is a computer programming language. It came out very early on when the web kind of first was invented and created. So it's one of the older programming languages compared to others. And it structures the web. So if you think about this like a newspaper, right? A newspaper has, what do they have? They have headlines. They have, you know, opening paragraphs, right? And then they have the content of the actual article. And those articles usually have images. Sometimes they're kind of fixed in different positions. And there's quotes that are sometimes scattered between those. And there's also pages, right? So every page, there's like a header where it names the newspaper and a footer where it counts what page you're on and that kind of thing. And so HTML is our version of that for the web, and it structures a website. So all of those things that I just listed also need to be done with code, right? And so this is a very brief sample of what it looks like. And notice how some of it's blue and some of it's black, right? We call this syntax and formatting. And notice that right now also it's sort of indented, right? So the body is indented in, and then inside it another item is indented even more. All right, it's sort of nonsense, of course. But this is the very basics. And so this sample of code right here becomes something like this. I know it's a bit fuzzy, but hopefully you get the general idea. Right? The browser took this information we just saw and it made it presentable to the user. Right? They don't need to see all of those symbols and all that indentation and all that stuff that was happening in the code isn't important to the user. And so the browser knows how to convert all that into something meaningful for the user to see. Okay. So let's break this language down. It's very basic. It's called a markup language. And what that means is it doesn't do any computing, right? It doesn't do math. It can't add numbers together. It can't, if you know anything about computer programming, like it can't do conditionals where it like checks if this thing is something, then something else should happen. It doesn't process any of that, right? We would use a language like JavaScript to do that. So HTML is very basic. It's just a markup language. And this language is built up of elements. So HTML uses elements to describe the structure of the page. All right, and we'll break down an element even more, but I want you to kind of visualize it here. Think of it sort of like a container, and we nest containers inside of containers, right? So there's a box inside of a box inside of a box, right? And that's how HTML works, is things are wrapped inside of other things, wrapped inside of other things. And the more complicated the project, the more times you might nest these elements together, okay? Now to write it, we create two things. Well, I guess three things in total. The first is an opening tag, all right? And every opening tag is made up of a left angle bracket and a right angle bracket, right? And you think of this like the less than and greater than symbols. We know these symbols from math. And what's wrapped inside of it is a character. And it's either one character or multiple characters, right? And these characters are predefined by HTML. So if we were to guess P, some of it is intuitive and some of it is sort of specific to HTML. So a P stands for paragraph. And we have other ones. We have an H1 that stands for heading 1 or header 1, and then H2, header 2. And so we can create hierarchy in our headings, just like a newspaper would, right? We also, even like a textbook, right? A textbook's another good example of this. We also have an image tag, which is IMG. So it's sort of shorthand. IMG is image. And then the most general one that we'll use is called a div, D-I-V. And the div tag is something that you'll start to see as we write code today, all right? And so every element is made up of an opening tag, and then we'll put the contents inside of it after that character, after the right angle bracket, and then everything is closed with the closing tag. All right, and so it looks almost identical to the opening tag, except we put this / in front of the character or characters, right? It always goes in front, but after the angle bracket. So it's less than / very important / backslash doesn't work, / the character, and then the right angle bracket. And what's important to realize is this character will always, always match the opening character. So if we open with the P, we need to close with the P, okay? So we open with the P, we close with the P. Now when we nest things, we then have to keep track of, all right? So I had a good question from Kayla. What does this do, right? So again, the tags themselves, the elements, the HTML elements are all predefined. So if you need a paragraph, right, you create a paragraph tag. And so you create the actual paragraph tag itself, and then inside of the opening and closing brackets, right, in between those two things is the paragraph itself, the content, right, the letters and sentences and whatever that make up the paragraph, okay? And so this will start to make sense as we get to the next step here. So again, always opening, always closing. So you may nest and you have to keep track of that, all right? Now the next thing that's important to know is that we have attributes. So every tag has an attribute. Now notice I'm using the word tag here because the tag is only for the opening tag. All right, we don't put attributes on the closing tags. So an attribute is made up of a key, right? An attribute name, and it's just letters, no quotes. There's always a space after the name of the element. So if this is a paragraph tag, we always add a space. We add the attribute name, and it equals with the equal sign. And in quotations, we can put the attribute's value. So the language equals English US, right? That's what that stands for. Now, we don't have to put this in all of our elements. Browsers thankfully know our language, but this is a great example, right? We know what this means just by looking at it. And then again, here's a better example of, right, the paragraph in English, right? That's the content of the element. And so what these do is it gives us extra information on an element. All right, and there will be a couple of examples of attributes that I teach you today. And so as we get to it, you'll see some useful attributes that you can use in order to get work done. All right, and to build out a website. Here we go, and I'm just gonna keep track of the chat. And so, yeah, I do want to mention, a good question was just asked about what characters are allowed. So in this case, we're using all of the alphanumeric keys. We call this UTF-8, but like if you try to put in like international symbols, sometimes that throws things off. And so generally when you program with alphanumeric characters. And basically every major symbol that you see on your keyboard is supported. But if you start hitting the Alt key and you start pressing those funny buttons where you get funny characters coming out, some of those characters don't always work with this language, but thankfully, what you see here in this screenshot, these are all the major characters that we'll use, right? The less than sign, the greater than sign, the quotations. Now make sure you use your keyboard's quotations inside of a text editor, right? We're gonna use Visual Studio Code today. There are some quote symbols like Microsoft Word uses that are slightly different. So you just have to keep an eye out or just use the appropriate tool when you're writing code, and it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, and so as I mentioned how web browsers work, how we need to download a page, right? And the browser needs to make sense of that code so that it can show the user what it needs to show. Every website and every web page that's visited on the web needs these major elements. All right, so there's 4, they're listed here at the top. There's an HTML tag, because this is an HTML document. There is a head tag, which always goes at the top of the file. And when we use it, this stuff doesn't get outputted. This stuff isn't outputted to the user. So this is like extra information, right? Like when you right click a file and you hit more info, it tells you like when the file was created, who made the file, stuff like that is where we put that information, right? Because we do need to, and later we're going to connect some things together. So when we need to make connections, we have to put information in the head, all right? I have a great question just came in. Tiffany asks, is it necessary to indent as you add sections? The funny answer is no. Indentation is not important to the language. What indentation is for our brains and our eyes to visually make sense of a document, especially as it gets larger and larger. So we indent as a way to organize our code, but at the end of all of this, when I talked about, you know, handing off files from server to server, this will all get compressed into one line, usually, right? And so, because computers don't need indentation, computers don't care, but we do, so we want to indent for the sake of ourselves. And I will tell everybody here now, you probably won't be very good at indenting when you first get started. You're gonna have like things be out of alignment and kind of in a weird place, and that does happen, and that's totally normal. And so I can mention now that attention to detail goes a very long way in this field. So if you are coding and you have a good attention to detail, like you'll notice, hey, this thing maybe could be indented better so it's more organized. So I hope those things help. right? Just learning anything new, right? And then finally, we do need the body tag, right? Well, actually, I guess I skipped title. Let's talk about that for a second. The title tag is, let's see if I can show it. The title tag shows up here on your browser. So if anyone's curious, like, how does that text show up? Where did that come from? That always comes from the title tag. So, and you'll write a title tag today. So you'll see when you create the file and then you open it up here in your tab, the title will be shown, all right? And then finally, we have the body tag, and the body tag holds all of the content for the web, right, the page. So everything you want the user to see needs to go inside of the body tag. So this is just a sample of a heading, right, the first heading and a paragraph. So if these things were put on the page, then it would be what's presented to the user. Okay, so we always need all of these items: HTML, head, title, and body. Right, we always need those things. So we're going to try this out ourselves. And I'm going to do this with you. And there's so many of us, right? There's like 50 of us on this call right now. So I'm going to do my best to support everybody through this. And if there are specific questions, I don't mind specific questions, but it is going to be important. And I'll show you a couple of ways to work with this, but it is important that you have Visual Studio Code installed, okay? Because that's where we're going. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I need to switch what I'm sharing. Let's see, screen share. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to, actually, let me stop here. Let me just share a screen really quick. Share a desktop. Share, here we go. All right. So this is Mac OS. This will also work fine in Windows. Everything that we do today will work on all platforms, or Linux, or whatever computer you have. It won't work on an iPad or a phone, right? Because these apps don't exist, or at least Visual Studio Code doesn't exist on those devices. So it is important you have a laptop and a keyboard and a mouse, that kind of computer. But what we want to do is we want to, let me just come here. You want to go somewhere on your computer that you can find. So if you want to go to downloads, go to downloads. And up here, you can say new folder, because we want to create a folder, right, for this project. So we can call this like DC HTML CSS crash course. If you want to call it that, you can. And I don't mind chatting that to you all right now. So this sort of thing. Notice I don't use spaces. I don't use uppercase letters. I keep it really simple, because when these web servers share things, right, with each other, it's important that we have symbols that all computers are happy with. So this is sort of the best way to go. I will also recommend that you name files this way. So use dashes, don't use spaces, don't use uppercase letters, just use lowercase letters. Use dashes if you want to make more than one, like word, right? Something like that. And that's all we want to do to get started. You're going to have an empty folder, all right? And you can close this. So now that folder exists, you just have to remember where it is, all right? So the next step, if I can get to it, is to open up Visual Studio Code, right? So that's the next step. I'll give everyone a moment to make sure they have it opened. And hopefully it shows you the welcome screen. It's a very helpful screen. If you've never used Visual Studio Code before, you're going to see this. Just checking in, right? Is everyone on the same page? There'll be a little bit of free-formed time in a few minutes. So if someone really can't get things started or can't get things opened, I can do my best to try to support you and help you through that, okay? And as you figured, we're gonna open that folder. So right now there's no files, and that's okay. We go up to File, and we go to Open, and we just need to find that specific file. So it was in my Downloads folder, and it was called DC, so this is alphabetical, and it's empty. That's okay. I open up an empty folder, and what should happen is the sidebar here should show the name of the project. Do we see that? I can't hover over it, otherwise it covers it. But up here, we can see the name of the project show up. And you can always close this welcome tab. You don't have to keep it open. All right, so we're going to create our very first line of code. And to do that, we have to create a file. All right, so it has to be living in a file to work. So I can hit this new plus button right here. It looks like a little file. And we're going to call this index.html. All right. So I've got someone that's having a little bit of trouble. So we'll figure out how to get you there, okay? And I don't mind waiting a second. Do we have Visual Studio Code installed? That's the biggest step, right? We have to have this application on our computer. Some of us might have not done it yet, so that's okay. You'll have a little bit of time to catch up. I've done my best to mention it a few times, but you know, life happens and that's okay. So when I create this, let me show you what happens, because I had a really good question just asked. When I do that, it creates a file in my on my computer. That's what the code editor will do. Okay, and so now we're just going to get started. We're going to have to do what I had explained. Now know that I'm a very fast typer, so I don't expect anyone to be able to keep up at the same pace. Again, I've been doing this for quite a few years, and I have this really weird, fancy keyboard that's split in half and blank. So I'm just kind of one of those crazy guys that likes to type really fast. So just go at your pace, and I'm going to do my best to pause and to give everybody time, right? But we know that every website needs an HTML tag. And if you're lucky, I think most of the time Visual Studio Code will attempt to close the tag for us, but I'm going to go ahead and type it out anyway. So that's the first one. And notice that it may be all in one line. And so what I want to do is hit the Enter key a couple of times, as much as I want, and create space between it. Now, you can be as organized as you want. I find that when code is too bunched together, it can be sort of tricky to read. So do this at your own pace, whatever works for you. And also notice that I have these line numbers that show up at the side of my file. So this is, we haven't talked about this much yet, but this is a plain text file. All this file is simple characters put into a file, right? It's nothing complicated. And so every single line can be numbered, and this is a great way for developers to reference things and to make sense of the code, right? So what I can do is hit the tab key, and Visual Studio Code will know that the tab key wants me to indent once. So we also know that we need a head tag. So I can also do that. And I know it's going to need to be more than one line. So I will follow the indentation. And I know that the opening and closing tag need to be on the same level of indentation. So I will create my closing tag. And if you're bored or you've figured this out already, feel free to type and retype this out as much as you want. There's no harm in muscle memory, right? Now, what's important is we only want one head tag. I didn't mention that before. Only one head tag is important. I'm just going to follow my character around. If you need to create an index file, you can push this plus button here for new file, and it will kind of prompt you in the sidebar to create a file. And you just type out the file name. Okay. We also need a body tag, right? And I might retype this body. And notice that it's sort of off indentation right now. If I want, I can hit Shift Tab to go backwards. So I can hit, depending on where my cursor is, I can hit Tab to go forward, and I can hit Shift Tab to go backwards, which is a really helpful way to get around. So someone just asked about the closing tag. I would, for now, just sort of let it help you. If you have to, you can just delete it. You just backspace it. I think when you put the / Visual Studio Code is doing its best to help you and to try to close the tag for you. If someone really needed help, I think I don't recommend this, but you can do it. If you go up to your settings, file, no, not file. Where is it? You can view command palette and you can type in settings. And there's all sorts of things you can do in there, but I don't recommend diving into there too early on. Otherwise you might get a little bit overwhelmed with options. But you can allow it to close for you, right? It's okay. There is something missing. Does anyone know what needs to be added to this document in order for it to work? Chad says title.
The
Yeah,
title?
Chad says title, very good. And was that Ramu? Yeah, man, you got it. And remember, the title tag always goes in the head. It always goes in the head. That's where it goes. So we put it there, and I can just say like, you just put your name if you want. I'm gonna just put my first name for now. Put my name. All right. Now I'll show you the most basic way that we load this and see if it works, right? Because as of right now, there's no body, but it is a valid document. And so this should be able to load if we want it to load. So I have a browser called Brave installed. It is exactly the same thing as Google Chrome. It works the exact same way. It just has a couple extra features built in. All right, so you can follow along with me here. It's the exact same steps and process. And I'll show you the way that I can open a document. This works for me. I'll show you two ways to do it, but this is sort of the easiest. If you go back into your file system, you can right click the file. I think this works in all operating systems, and you can right click and open with, and you choose the browser. All right, and you're gonna see a blank screen. And you're going to see something along the lines of this. It'll be file, and it'll be the path to the file, right? And I can show you in both versions how that works. And I don't mind doing that. But you'll just see a blank file. And so what's happened, just to explain right how the web works, is our computer didn't need to download it from a server, right? All it did was it loaded the existing document on our computer. There's no need to download anything because it's right here. And so what we're doing is we're just telling the computer to load the index HTML file. And so if we switch back to our browser and we add something simple like this, Josh, heading, if I wanted to say heading, I could. And we go back to our browser, we do have to, at this point, we have to reload every time we work with it, right? But we see that my title's okay. It says Josh, just like I wrote it, but it's still blank. And that's because we have to reload every time we make a change, all right? So you have to reload the page with the refresh button. I'm currently on Brave, but I will make sure that I show all this off on Chrome as well, all right? So again, you can, if you want to, you can create a paragraph tag with a P. This is a sentence, right? I hit save, I can go back to the browser, I can reload, and I'm also gonna see that that shows up as well. So it's very easy. If you want, you can look up something like HTML elements. There's lots of HTML elements out there. There's lots of really basic, W3 Schools is a really great website for this. I can share this page. This is a great, I've been here before many times. All right, and this one is specifically, just shows us more tags, right? There's more tags that we can work with. So there's paragraph tags. There is, it talks about the heading tags. It talks about all sorts of things here, right? This is sort of a useful website. And you'll find that going online, you'll see a lot of a lot of resources online, right? It's sort of, there's a running joke that developers Google a lot of things throughout the day, right? We spend a lot of our time just looking for other things. So it's okay to totally look something up. You'll learn over time how best to look up the thing that you're looking for, right? That's always the hardest part about using Google. So if you are good at Googling, you'll find that this is a great, you'll find that this is a great profession for you, because there's a lot of just trying to find the right answer or read documentation, which is kind of similar to a textbook when a textbook describes things. All right, and so just as a reminder, actually Desmond has a question. The way to open this is we go find the HTML file on the computer where we saved it. So in my case, it was in the downloads folder, and I created this folder called DC HTML CSS Crash Course inside it. And then we just right click and open with browser. Usually there's some default browser, so we can always follow that. And I can sort of stick to where we're at. Can't eject right now. All right. So all of this works here as well. So if I wanted to, I could open with a different browser. It does the exact same thing. All right, and looks the same way. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to type along and to continue this. All right. You don't have to create exactly what I created, but it will be helpful if it looks very similar. Make sure you have your HTML. Make sure that everything is inside of it. Then there's a head tag and a body tag, right? And inside the head is the title, and inside of the body is, I added just a couple of elements just to make sure that everything works. All right, and I think you can also right-click the file and you can reveal in Finder, at least for Mac. You can do it this way. So this is another useful way of getting to the file on your hard drive, right? You have to find the file in order to open it. So I will leave the code because I know that's the most foreign thing to everybody. So go ahead and, like, if you're on screen and you have a video, like, give a thumbs up or give me a thumbs up if you're making something and you're able to download it, or not download it, you're able to load it and you can see it and it's working. Okay, cool, I see them popping up. Thumbs up. And for any skeptics out there, I can promise that you learn better by doing, right? So just sitting and listening, you won't learn as much. This may feel really familiar to some of you, and so that's okay as well. But I would love for everybody to play along. All right, Luke's having some trouble. Luke, we might need to figure out where you're at, man, and we can get you started. Yep, your code looks good. Oh, Justin's having trouble with VS Code, okay. Well, you'll have a little bit of time to catch up, right? We're here till around 8, right? And it's 7. So we're gonna make some momentum here. We're gonna move forward. It's gonna start to feel faster and faster for some of you. Like, oh my gosh, like we wrote 6 lines of code and now we're doing this, all right? So we are gonna move. Oh yeah, Luke, it may not be HL, it's H1, as in the number 1. Good catch, Giovanni, that was a good catch. All right.
New on my side too, and I just noticed I had to go back in and reload from the folder for my text to show up if anyone else is having the same issue. I couldn't just reload the browser for some reason.
Interesting. Well, so the next step, I want to add a helpful tool. So we're going to see, it's a little bit of a harder step, so I want to make sure that everyone can follow along when we get there. All right. Let's see, let's go back. I'm going to stop sharing because we're going to jump back to the presentation. Let's go back. Here we go. Yes. So many of you have it, And if you don't have it fully working yet, as we come through this, you're going to have an opportunity to get it working. So don't be too stressed out if it's not there yet, because we have time. All right. So I'm going to recommend that, let's see, I'm going to copy this and paste it. I don't know how easily. Oh, I might mention, if you don't save the file when you go to reload it, you won't see the change. So it's very important that if you type things that are different, right? Another paragraph. You'll see that this little symbol at the top is a white circle, usually, in most cases. That means the file has not been saved. And so what you want to do is you want to either go all the way up here to File and Save, or you can hit Command-S on macOS or Control-S on Windows. And when you hit Command-S, it'll save the file, and you'll see that that dot goes away. So it is important that you save the file before you try to look at the file again, right? Because it can't load the changes unless they're saved to the hard drive. And that's what's happening, okay? So that's sort of a very common gotcha that I want to make sure people, so as we write code, make sure you save before you load. All right, so I just linked to a resource. Let's see, yeah, I just linked to a resource right here. Oh, maybe not, let me show you what it is. It is called Open in Browser, very helpful. So I will copy this, and you just have to give the system permissions. So you have to copy and paste this into your browser, but you just hit the install button. So we'll go back to it. You hit install, and it will say, are you sure you want to allow your browser to open Visual Studio Code? And you say, yeah, no problem. And when you do that, you're going to see share. You're going to see this. And I might as well uninstall it just to show you what it looks like. You'll see this little green button. Thankfully, 1.7 million people have used it with a 4-star rating. It looks like maybe 3.5, but that's still good. So we want to install it. All right, and you can close that once it's installed.
Hey, Josh, I'm sorry, what is the use for this?
Yeah, I'm about to show you. So we were previously trying to go to the file and right click and open with browser. So what we can do is we can use the command prompt. All right, so this is just another step in a very useful tool for working with our files. All right, because that was sort of the trickiest step, right? How do you get to the file and open it and put it in the browser? In macOS, it is Command-Shift-P. You push all those things together and you're going to see this prompt at the top of the screen with the greater than sign. And this is the command prompt. So this allows us to basically run any action in Visual Studio Code. There's thousands of actions, and as you install more plugins, you'll get more actions. So there is one specifically called Open in Default Browser. So if Google Chrome is not your default browser, this will open it with your default browser. I believe there's also there's an other browser option. So if you want to select that, it will give you a list of all of the major ones that it knows. So Google Chrome is the one we want to use. So I just hit enter and it opens up the file.
What was that shortcut again, Josh?
Command-Shift-P, and it's also Control-Shift-P for Windows. So it's command is that symbol with it looks like a square with circles on the edges or on the corners. So, yep. So my default browser is the Brave browser, right? So I wanted to explicitly tell it to open in Chrome. But that does the exact same thing as what we had done before, right? Where we went to the file and we opened it up manually. It's the same step, it's just a little bit less time. And you'll see that it shows me the character right here. This is the keyboard shortcut that's installed. So this is the Alt key. So Alt B will do the same thing. So if you're one of those keyboard shortcut wizards like I am, you'll start to memorize these to be able to use them. Okay. But we do have to keep going. So feel free to use that. Feel free to do it the original way. Both work just fine and do the same thing. So there's no pressure there. I'm going to stop sharing and let's talk a little bit more about code. All right. So that is the very basics of HTML. And when we're done, we should have our basic web page, all right? So if you've gotten it working, or at least you've started writing code, even if it isn't fully working yet, you are now a developer. You now know computer programming at least a little bit, right? So this is the hardest step. This is the first step. Getting into this world is how do I write code? How do I run code? How do I see if what I wrote did anything and did what I expected? Okay, and so that's the first step, right? Our summary here is that the HTML creates structure for the page, thinking like a newspaper, how it has headings and images and paragraphs and all of these elements, right? Because HTML is made up of elements, which we know is the opening tag and the closing tag and everything in between it. So put all of that together and you have an HTML element, okay? And then finally, we talked about tags including attributes. We haven't written any attributes yet, but we will very soon. And we know that every HTML page is made up of the HTML tag or the HTML element, right? And inside that is a head element and a body element. And inside of the head element is a title element, right? We put all that together, takes just a couple of minutes, hopefully, and you have a working web page. And we'll just add to it over time. All right, and I am talking kind of quickly, and we only have 2 hours together to kind of learn these basics. And so this is recorded, as Harmony just mentioned. So you'll be able to rewatch this and practice this as many times as you'd like. So that's HTML. Next up is CSS. And that stands for Cascading Style Sheet. This came out, if not at the exact same time, very soon after HTML was invented. And it's a way in which we can style our web page. So remember, we talked about that. I like to use the analogy of Microsoft Word, right? So CSS styles the web. So I think of it like the toolbar in Microsoft Word. Hopefully, there's no one young enough here that doesn't know what Microsoft Word is, but there's all these options, right? We can change the font. We can increase the font size or shrink the font size or align the text to the middle of the screen or the right of the screen or change the color of the font, right? So you'll see that some of these tags are built in, like there is a strong tag. There's also a bold tag. And if you use the bold tag, it will bold text for you, but you can manually add bold, italicize, underline, align, change the styles, and more importantly, change the colors, right? Because every web page is not a white screen with black text, right? And let's go to an example. What's a good example? I guess we can go to my website just for now. Mine is sort of a white-ish screen, but I have a lot of things going on here. I have blue links. Inside of that, I have images, right? And all things that are styled. And you'll even see this box at the bottom for newsletter signups, right? It's sort of like off gray, and it has this black border around it, including the footer down here, right? How the site was built and the copyright stuff is all under this dark gray background with white text. So like, how does all that happen? That happens with CSS. All right, and we're gonna break it down a little bit more as we go through this presentation, but you'll see that, so I'm hoping this comparison is useful. It's not a direct comparison, but it is a useful analogy. But of course, we're programmers, so we write code. We don't click buttons on Visual Studio Code. We have to write it out ourselves. So this is a sample of what that looks like. All right, so I'm just going to give you a second to digest this. And then we'll, of course, I'll explain what this means and how it works. So we can see background color, color, text align. You may not know what those things do yet, but we're going to find out today. So that's a short sample. And of course, that ends up looking like this. It's kind of funny, right? This background color, what are these letters and numbers? What does that mean, right? And color orange, okay, we know what orange is. Text align center, that makes sense, right? And it ends up looking like this. So the text is orange and centered into the middle, right, or aligned to the center. The background color is some off blue, right, whatever that is. But let's break this down. Let's break down what the code means. So first we create a CSS selector. And the selector, it's our way of associating our CSS to the HTML elements. So the most basic selector is we can select an HTML tag, all right? So in this case, we have a paragraph tag. Now, the indentation, of course, and the spaces and things like that aren't important in the programming language, but they are very, very helpful to you to stay organized. So we usually have a space followed by a curly bracket, and then underneath that is called a declaration. So this declaration is then defined, and then we have a closing curly bracket. So notice that each one has this sort of opening and closing curly brace between or wrapping around the declaration. All right, and then we'll continue to break this down. Each declaration, right, is a property that indicates what aspect you want to change. So in this case, we can also comma separate. So I have the heading 1, comma separated heading 2, comma separate heading 3, and the last item doesn't need a comma. You don't include a comma there. And then we have our curly bracket. All right, so in this case, we have 2 declarations, and every declaration comes with a property and a value. So the property in magenta here, right, is also dash separated, lowercase, and it uses the colon, and then after that is the value. So colon value. So the values, you can see 2 values here are in yellow, and every line of CSS, every declaration we make, it's only the declarations, we include a semicolon at the end. It's very important to this language that you always include a semicolon at the end of every declaration, all right? Because what happens is if you have one declaration and then you add a second without that semicolon on the first, it will create an error and the CSS will crash, and we don't want that. Kind of like periods for sentences, yes. Tiffany's got it, right? It's like, the unfortunate thing about programming languages is it's not that you get a bad grade, right? Because a teacher will just mark it with a red marker or whatever, a red pen, and tell you you have a B because you didn't use periods. Unfortunately, with programming languages, they are very, very literal. So if you do not include exactly what's needed, it will fail. And sometimes it will tell you it failed, and sometimes it won't. And it's hard to predict sometimes how helpful it will be at telling you when you've missed something, right? But thankfully, CSS is just another markup language. It's very simple. And so Visual Studio Code does do some things to help us with this. All right, so I have a good question. When I'm talking about HTML, mentioning the attributes and values, right? We're now using the CSS property value, right? These things are not interchangeable. So the HTML properties, right, are inside of the HTML tags. Those are different sets of properties and values, and CSS has its own version, which are in between the curly brackets, and they're also properties and values. Now, in the most basic sense, they're similar in what they're achieving. They're just achieving different things because they're different languages, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But we'll see more as we write CSS out ourselves. And I know that we visualized HTML with those boxes earlier, and CSS actually works the same way. CSS works with boxes, and we'll be able to work with these boxes today. And so again, you can sort of imagine, right? Okay, there's the heading, right? This one. There's a paragraph, and look at that. There's an item inside of the paragraph. We call these inline elements. So we can nest elements inside elements, right? And so there's all sorts of, if you can count, does anyone want to guess how many elements are on this page? And I will tell you now, the black box is not an element. Although I guess we could count it as the body or the HTML element. I see 8, I see 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, a lot of good guesses here. We're gonna say 8. 7 might be a good guess. You might even guess less than that if we don't include the black box. So the black box doesn't count, everything inside that. So we have this main one, this orange one, and we call this a wrapper element. So the funny thing about HTML and CSS is sometimes we need to create elements that don't have explicit words inside of them. And I'll show you a good example of that today. All right, so we do have this outside container. Then we have these 4 major containers. So that leaves us with 5. But then we have these 3 green ones inside of it. So 6, 7, 8. So if you said 8, that was a good guess. That's the right answer. If someone guessed 15, I'm very curious how you got that many numbers. But if we just count the boxes, not including the black one, we get that. Now, if we needed to count all of the elements, right, there's more elements we can't see. We know the body tag exists. We know the HTML tag exists, the head tag, the title tag. We could count all those things, but for the sake of this, there are 8 visual containers and boxes that we can count from here, right? And it's not overly important that you're able to count. I just want you to start to break this idea down. And so when you visually look at it, you can get a sense of how this works, okay? Now the box is actually used for purpose. It's not just a box for the sake of existing. We're able to style elements using the following properties, okay? So there is a margin property, there's a border property, a padding property, and then the content lives inside of all that, okay? So that's how, if we go back to my website, and I just wrapped an item in a div, right? This one actually has spacing. There's spacing around this element, right? Same with this input. We haven't talked about inputs yet, but there is an element called input, and it allows me to put in items into my input, right? Same with the button here, right? The button has spacing around the text. We don't want the text to rub up against the outside of the button. And so we have a good question. Is this margin or is this something else, right? So Chad, what's your guess? Do you want to guess? Let's guess like the space here around the container, right? Above the heading here and to the left. Someone's saying margin. I see another margin. I see a padding. Okay, so we have a split pull here. So remember, padding is next to the content, but between the border, and margin is outside of the border. Ah, Chad's getting it. So we would call this the padding, but then look, there's some space here between the box and the blue line. This would be margin because it's on the outside. And as there's more to dissect here, and we are going to break this down and visualize it better over time, okay? So this will all make sense over the next 10 or 15 minutes as we do this, all right? So we use this box. We actually call this the box model. That's what this is called. We use this so that we can shape and form and put things in layouts and create breathing room between elements and, you know, everything that we need to do to make it pleasant and a good experience for the developer, right? Even if we just go to google.com, we can immediately see, right? There's space between the input and the image. There's margin there. And same with the input itself. If I start searching for something, right, there's space between the text and the border of the box that I'm typing in. And that's padding, all right? So same with these buttons, right? There's padding around it. And then there's margin between the buttons, right? And when we hover over it, we can see that the border shows up, right? There's a very thin gray line that borders the whole box. So this is just Padding inside, margin out. That's good. That's really good. So he's getting it, right? And so we put these things all together to create what we want to create. So I want you to do this. Let's do this ourselves. Let's try this out. Let's play around with this and see if we can get it to work. Something I haven't talked about yet is colors. All right, we haven't talked about colors yet. This is a site that I really like called Color Hex. I've been using it for years. Color Encyclopedia website, and I can put in a color. Let's put in the color red. All right, so here's the color red. Notice that it resolved to this weird pound sign thing, which I don't have this in my slides, but I can really mention this really quick. Hexadecimal color. All right. All right, let's see. Is there a good example here? Yep, this is a good example. Ooh, this is actually a really good article. Old article. This is how long I've been around. I remember this article from back in the day. Let's see, where is that? Here we go. I don't mind linking to this if you guys really want to, if any of my color nerd friends out there, because I'm a color nerd, want to break this down, you can. Of course, don't read it while I'm teaching. We'll save it for later. But you can see that the first two characters stand for the amount of red or lack of red, depending on what color you're choosing. The second two characters, or the third and fourth characters here, represent the green, and the final two represent blue. And so, as you know, if you're not familiar with how colors work, we can mix red, green, and blue all together to get whatever color we want. Because computer monitors and all of the screens, right, we have all these screens in our lives, they are RGB monitors, red, green, blue monitors, right? Every computer screen is made up of those three colors. That's even how most computers work nowadays, right? Or not computers, all our TVs, all screens work that way. All right, so so I have a good person clarifying, right? It's a code that represents the amount. It's not primary colors. Primary colors are red, blue, and yellow. But with computer screens use red, green, and blue to decide on how to create a color that our eye understands, okay? So it's not primary. Primary is red, blue, yellow. This is RGB. RGB is a very specific color format. And this is called a hex number.
Hey Josh, it's the same thing that they use in the Sherwin-Williams paint shop. Do
they? Okay.
No, well, I'm asking.
I don't think so. Most colors. So? Okay. No, in the print world they use CMYK, and we're not gonna get too nerdy with colors because I've only got 2 hours to talk about all this. Cool. But paint they use different values. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So different industries use different representations of color. So for what's important for all of you to know is we use RGB, red, green, blue. So you can use a site like Color Hexa to find the color you want, right? This one has a color picker, so you can like find the color that you like. I like this blue, that's pretty. So if I search for that, it'll show me information about that color, but mostly I just need the hexadecimal. All right, but we are gonna practice this together. So there is one step that you do need to make all this happen. We need to create a new file and call it style.css. And that is where our styles are gonna live. And for now, I'm gonna create something simple.
Josh, will you show your
oh, I'm not showing the code. Thanks for clarifying. All right, so let me delete. We're gonna hit that plus button again, and it's gonna ask me to write a new file. So I'm gonna call it style and .css. So we have to type that out ourselves, .css. And now we can create a selector. So I'm gonna select body, and then my curly brackets. And notice that it's already complaining. It's like, hey, it shouldn't be empty. You have to have properties and values in here for it to be valid, right? Because there's no values yet. So I can call background-color, and I can paste in my color value, and you can guess what that will do. In fact, if I load the browser and reload, we're going to see that it doesn't reflect it yet, okay? So it's not going to work until we do another step. But this is sort of what the code looks like. And what's cool is Visual Studio Code has a color picker. So if you hover over the color, you can change the value. You do have to start with a valid value, but you can change this as much as you want, which is cool. Now be careful, sometimes if you use this tool, it might switch it to a different value, which I would for now stick to hexadecimal. Also simple things like blue, excuse me, blue and green and black. There's some keywords for basic colors that also work. Just keep in mind that it's not, those colors aren't precise. Different browsers will just sort of go, oh, you need green, here's green. And it just sort of decides what green is. So if you want to be more specific, you want to include a hexadecimal code. As long as you include that, it will always be the color that you want. All right. So remember, HTML is the structure and CSS is the styling. So we do have to tell the system, we have to tell the computer that the styles exist, basically. All right, and let me keep up with chat, make sure that we're all good here. Oh, I just copy and paste. So if you do Command C, Command V, you can even right click and copy. However you copy paste, hopefully that's something everyone is used to doing. All right, so here we are. Now we need to link them together. So to do this, we need to go to the HTML file. And remember, all the stuff that doesn't happen on the screen happens in the head. So of course it's going to happen here. So what we're going to call is, if you do this with Visual Studio Code, it will do it for you. Otherwise, you can type this out by hand. It's all, both are good. Link.css. We're going to see that in many of your cases, you should be able to see this option pop up here on the screen. You just hit enter, and it's going to do the following. It's going to show me link, and you can type this out yourself, and we can copy paste this. Be very careful with copy paste, because I think some of the characters turn a little bit funny when we go into the, when we copy and paste from here. So don't copy and paste, just type it out. I can type it out. Link, the relationship to the document to the file, that's what this property means, is called style sheet. Because it's a CSS, it's a CSS style sheet. That's what we call a CSS file. And the href is it's the reference to the position of the file. All right, if that makes sense, hopefully it does. And we just name the file, including the extension. So you have to include, so this file name has to match the name of our file exactly. All the uppercase, lowercase have to be the exact same. Spaces, dashes, everything has to match perfectly. And when they match perfectly, and right, you only need one entry, so don't include it twice, just include it once. Style.css needs to match perfectly. And if you wrote styles plural, then you need to create styles plural here. But it needs to be exactly what you called the file. This is a reference to the file, okay? So you can name it whatever you want, but if you want to follow along, name it style. See, I knew that Visual Studio Code would put the word style.css in there for you. So I was trying to be helpful by thinking ahead. All right, so let's explain it one more time. Well, let me just show you that it worked. My background color changes. Oh, it's blue, right? It's kind of obnoxious, but we know it works. The link is going to link one thing to another thing using HTML, right? That's all the link means. We can link all sorts of things. But in this case, we define two properties and values on this tag, all right? And I'm gonna explain one more thing when I'm done with this, okay? So the relationship the rel property, if you hover over it, it will say, this attribute names a relationship of the linked document to the current document. The attribute must be a space-separated list of link type values. So if you really wanted to, you can click that, it will open up documentation. But style sheet is what we're going for here. That's what, it's CSS, so this is the word we need to use. I have a good question from Justin, how to comment. I'll mention that once we get there. And then style.css is the name of the file. And it needs to be in the same folder as index.html. Okay, so both of these files are in the same folder. And so when that happens, you should be able to reload your HTML and you'll see that it works automatically. All right, and so what's happening is when the HTML sees line 4, it sees, oh, I need to download the styles.css file and load that on the web browser. And so it does all of that for us. And we have a body tag. And so when I select the body tag with my CSS, it changes the background color of that element to this shade of blue that I've set as the value. All right, and then it changes to that. Kind of cool, right? We've just started. I mean, this is very much a beginner's class, right? But make sure you save the CSS file, make sure you save the HTML file, and then make sure that you reload everything when you're done. Remember, you always have to save the file. That's the trickiest part here. Everything needs to be saved. And if you really need to, you can go up here, File, and there's a Save All button. So if you, when in doubt, you could always go there. And then you have to reload, right? You have to manually push the reload button to see the change. But make sure there's no syntax errors. What I mean by syntax is that every character is in the right place. So it's body, just B-O-D-Y, no dots, no dashes, no nothing, just the name of the element, no greater than or less than signs. And then the curly brackets, and then background dash color, followed by the colon, followed by the hexadecimal code, followed by a semicolon. So we need all of those things. All of those things have to be written correctly. All of those things have to be saved to your hard drive successfully. And everything has to be reloaded in the browser. And when we follow all of those steps, we should see that it's working. All right, and there are like 50 of us here. But if there's anyone that specifically has a question, go ahead and comment it, and we can talk a little bit more about anything before we move on. So I'll mention a couple things we can do. We can do font family, and there's a sans serif that just means like fonts without the little things hanging on the side. Like this is a serif font because like the L has those pieces on the bottom and the little mark at the top. So if I get rid of those, you'll actually see the browser. You'll see the font change. So watch these values. I hit reload, and it loads just a basic font from my computer that doesn't have those serif characters. All right, and you're welcome to rewatch this as many times as you'd like. And if I really wanted to, I'm not going to keep this one permanently, but I could change the color white. And what some properties in CSS will do, including the font family, if you noticed, is that it will change everything inside of it. So all of the font that's inside of this will change to white. And I'm just reloading the page to show you. All right, so I have a good comment, someone mentioning like that index and style are two files, right? And they're in the same folder, and they're linked together using the link. It's not a command, it's an HTML element, right? So the HTML element's called link. Oh, my lights are turning on, the sun's going down. All work, right?
Hey, Josh, quick question. Sometimes you have to put these code, the CSS code in the server, right? Is that sometimes happens, or like what is the use case scenario? Sometimes people use this CSS code that you write and put it on the server itself, right?
Yeah, so we're not talking about servers today. What I want you to know is that if the index file and the CSS file are in the same folder and we write our code this way, the computer knows that both files are here and it can load both files on the browser. And so when you go to put it on a server and to host it, which we're not going to talk about much today, all of your files will be hosted together, right?
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, so all of these files get packaged up and put on a server together so that the same thing can happen when we have a hosted site. That's what
Appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You got it, okay. People are just kind of looking at it, referencing it, make sure they got it. Now notice there's no closing link here. Your faces are in the way here. I gotta move this. All right. This, it's trying to be helpful, is not valid. You can't do this in HTML because link is what we call a self-closing tag. I didn't want to throw too much at you at once, but this is one of those tags that you cannot put a closing tag. It is only meant to live on its own as just one tag that opens by itself. Some people like to put a slash here at the end, sort of visually tell the user, but as of a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, browsers don't need that slash. So it's sort of up to you if you want it, but if you want to be 2020 web developer, you just don't have to include it, all right? So as you learn more tags, you'll learn which ones are self-closing and which ones need a opening and closing tag. All right, they're very well documented, right? Because remember, all of these elements that we create are all predefined. We're not making up fake elements. That's not a real element. And the browser would attempt to do something with it, but it's not the way that HTML works, okay? So this is CSS. So here's just a couple things that we can do with it. I do want to mention that we can select specific things like a header tag, right? H1, and I can change the size of it with the font size attribute. I could call it, let's call it something big like 50 pixels. So pixels are a very common value we use on the web, right? Our computer screen is made up of pixels. And so in the case of the font size, it indicates the desired height. So I want to say, I want the header font to be 50 pixels tall. That's what that means. So if I do that, you'll see that the font gets bigger. So that's cool, bigger than it was before. Now notice there is sort of some spacing between everything. That's because browsers do their best to add some default values just to make, you know, to keep things sane, I guess would be the best way of saying it. And so every browser does it a little bit differently. And we, of course, can overwrite those values. All right. Now, there's one more important thing to know and to understand about CSS. Let's make sure, let me make sure that I'm on the right track here with where we're going. Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, we called it cascading, right? We use that word in the language. The C in CSS, it stands for cascading. So what that means is if we have things that conflict with each other, like this H1 and this H1, both are defining the font size. So let's make the font size like crazy, right? If it's cascading, it means it goes from the top and it goes down. But what it means is the last value is the one that's used, okay? So the thing that's at the bottom of the file will be the thing that's run, right? I see a couple people, this has popped up a couple times now for commenting. In CSS, you can use, now you don't have to use double slashes. It's kind of a strange syntax. It is /*, and then */, and everything inside of it is ignored, all right? You can also do this with command /. It's a helpful little way to toggle your comments. It works in every programming language in VS Code. So feel free to use that if people are making notes, I'm assuming, while you're working. And that's okay. You can, we can say CSS cascading means last value is used, something like that. So if we go back to my browser and we reload it, we see that it definitely has decided to use 100 pixels for the size. And this only really is a worry or matters when things conflict. So this conflicts. This value and this value are doing the same thing. So the browser won't tell us, hey, you already defined the font size for header 1. It doesn't do, it's not that smart. It's very literal in how it processes this information. All right, so that's that. And it's, yeah, so in Mac and Windows, it's control / and Mac, it's command /. It should be on your, most people, it should be your right pinky on the bottom row. So hopefully you've done a little bit. You've made a couple of style changes, maybe you changed the background color or the font size of something. And something I want to keep in mind is that when you call something like this H1, this will mean every H1. So if we were to create another H1 element and call it test, you're going to see that it also is 100 pixels tall. It's also very large, okay? Because that's how we select things in this case with the H1. All right? So that's the very basics, and we're running out of time here, so we just need to move forward. And I'm hoping that you're getting the idea of how this language works. So if you want to know how to add margin and padding, we can do that quickly. Let me stop sharing, go back. This is going to be the most helpful thing, I think, for everybody in learning how all this works. All right, so hopefully some of you or most of you have gotten something working and running, as you'd expect. Yep, always make sure that you include the opening and closing curly brackets. It's not loading, there we go. So, yay, you're stylish, you've made some styles. Hopefully they've made a change to your web page, right? Again, this is just the very basics here. So we know that we can create the style for the web using like the word analogy, where like we overwrite values or we update certain things on the page by setting properties. It's made up of selectors, so we select things, and then inside of our selector, we do the curly brackets and we declare values, right? We use declarations. And then we have, every declaration is made up of a property and a value. So every property is named, it's predefined, it's documented well. So it's just a matter of, it just takes time to read and to learn these properties. And then each property has a specific kind of value that it wants. It might want a percentage, it might want a color value, it might want a font name, right? There's all sorts of, and depending on which property it is, will determine what value to use. And then finally, everything works with the box. And so in the next section, we're going to dive into the box a little bit more and show you how it works. All right, and to do that, we're going to use the inspector, right? And there's not a lot of slides for this. There's no explanation here. But what I want you to know is that it's our ability to read and manipulate code on any website, which is really cool and fun to do. Unfortunately, we don't have time to tinker too much with all of this, but we are going to dive right in, and I'm going to show you how this works. All right, so let's jump back to where we were. So this can be done on any page, but for now, we're going to do it on our web page. So you right click anywhere on the screen and you choose inspect. All right, this should be available everywhere. I'm going to close this. We're going to do it here. I updated everything the way I want it. Yes, okay, cool. So right click and inspect. Now, yours may pop up on the left, yours may pop up on the right. Right here, there's these options here on the triple dots. You can kind of decide where to position it. I don't mind it being to the right. And so remember how I told you that every web browser takes the HTML, takes the CSS, processes it, and then shows it to the user, right? That's what's happening every time that we work with this. And so this is the result of those things. So this code here isn't the file, it's not the HTML file, it's the result of the browser processing the file and creating information from it. Same with what we see down here, styles, right? This is a styles tab. This is the result of what the browser processed, okay? So this is like the end result. We put something in and this is what comes out. And you'll see that this is built up kind of like a tree. So we're able to nest things and look at things. And so we're able to just look at what's going on here. Now keep in mind that anything we change as I start to change values will not reflect on the files themselves. So if I do anything here, like if I take a paragraph, I right click and I decide I want to delete element, it will delete my paragraph. Although if I go back to the code editor, it doesn't actually change the file. It just changes what's being seen on the page as we look at it, okay? This is like a very temporary thing, which includes as well, if I click on body, we know the body tag was styled with a color. So I can go here and I can change the color using the color value, right? And get really obnoxious with all these colors. So if I wanted to get really crazy and do like fuchsia, I could. And I might decide, no, I think the font needs to be black now, right? So I can go in and I can change the properties and values manually, and I can go into the HTML. I can even like double click and change the sentence, right? And we see that it changes right as I make these interactions. But the files themselves stay the same, right? Because the browser has already processed it. So there's no reverse action here, right? But it's very useful in trying to get things to work before you know for sure, right? Maybe you don't like this color. Maybe you need to take some time and use the color picker to decide, okay, this is the right color. I'm gonna lighten it up and I'm gonna use this value. So what you can do is you can copy this value and go back here and change it, right? Oh, that's too many hex. Why is it? Oh, I see. I need to not. This is a alpha. This is an alpha thing. I need to not change it there. I need to change it here, like that. So that's kind of cool. It's like a soft color. And I think I've lost it already. Okay, that's fine. So you can kind of get stuck. If you ever get lost or you've done something the wrong way or you're kind of confused, right? Let's go ahead and switch this back to hex. This little sidebar here gives me that option. And I only need one £. And so if I do that, now my code is updated with that value. And then whenever you're in doubt and you're like, I don't like what I did, I need to undo my action, you just reload the page and everything goes back to the way it was. So why don't I actually put it back to blue? So you just reload the page. And unfortunately, everything's lost. So if you do go in here and you're tinkering and you're trying to change values, those things are gone forever. But that's okay because it's just meant for experimenting and making sense of things. So I always have fun with this. I like to go to like some website for like breaking news, and I'm sure we're going to see what we expect to see. We can kind of have fun with this. We can inspect. So if you right click and inspect something specifically, we're going to start to see how complicated websites can really get. So here's an example, very complicated website, right? And they have a header 2, H2. And they have all sorts of properties and values. But if I double click on the text, I can say, I could just change it to like man in suit stairs right? So I can do something silly like that, and you'll see that it changes the website, right? Just temporarily on my browser, it can change the values that I want to work with. So of course, man in suit looks at camera for 8 hours straight, kind of silly, right? Kind of fun. But you can see that you can even reverse engineer certain things if you really wanted to. So if I wanted to know the font size, I could go in here and see that for now, this system is saying the font size is 36 pixels. So if I wanted to recreate font that's this size, I could use the same value, right? And be careful when you copy and paste. You don't want to just copy and paste things like, you know, blankly. And there's a conversation around plagiarism as well. You don't want to just openly take something from someone else that's not yours. But because the web is open and because all of this information is available to us, that's just the way these languages work. We can take inspiration from others, and we can learn from others by looking at how they do things, okay? So that is the Chrome inspection tool. And as you spend time in it, and as you kind of learn more about it, there's some really powerful ways to deal with it and to work with it, right? So someone is asking if there's a way we can save the changes. There are some ways to do it. You can do some research on your own to figure out how that works. It does get a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to explain that here. But typically, you can just tweak things and then go to your source code and make the same change if you're committing to it and you want that change to be permanent. All right, so there's a bit of a back and forth, and there's some clever tools that other people have made out there to make that happen. All right, so that's just really basic. Sometimes I spend a long time in that part of this course. Sometimes just sort of looking at it and seeing how it works. And so that's what we ended up doing today. But you may not feel like it, but just knowing HTML and knowing CSS and knowing what those two things are and how they work together, right? We've only spent about an hour, 45 minutes together. You've learned just the basics of all of this, right? So just as a quick refresher, right, the inspection tool allows us to inspect. It works on any website. It lets us view and manipulate the code however we want to. Any questions so far? We're sort of getting toward the end of this. No, okay. So now we want to build something a little bit more useful, right? I mentioned that we were going to build a web page. And so I think I may potentially be willing to stay a little bit longer to support people that are working. But I have this all written out for you. And there's a pretty straightforward approach to how we want to build this. So I'm going to quickly explain how you can go from like one heading and one paragraph to something a little bit more useful. And I'll show you what I built out. Let's see. Let's go ahead and share everything now. Share desktop.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Sure, sure, sure.
We're going to be able to watch all this again, right?
All this again. Yes, Harmony has recorded this, and she will, Harmony, as long as I know I'm speaking for you, do you want to tell them what's going to happen after this?
Yeah,
I just want to receive it.
I do have a little sign-up sheet, and I will add it back in. It's just a little Google Drive sheet that I'll add when we kind of wrap up in the Zoom chat section. But I also have the emails that you signed up for the Zoom with. So if for some reason it bounces, I do have another way, and I will be emailing it out. It does take a little bit of time to come down from Zoom for me to share. So as soon as it does, I will email it out.
Awesome.
That's great. Yeah, I'm excited. And again, like learning HTML and CSS, I hope that you like the way that I teach. I hope that the energy and the slides and the examples I gave are helpful to you. But of course, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of resources to learn these, because these are the very basics of the web and how they work, right? And so you'll find documentation. I keep saying that word. It's basically just a reference to the language itself and how it works. You'll find written articles, you'll find videos, courses. I mean, there's so many places that you can continue to learn. But let me show you my little project that I built, and I'll give you an idea of how to learn some really common best practices and things. So let me show you my little project. So I'm going to hit Command B or Alt B, right? Opens it up. And this is my little web page, right? It's just a really basic project, but it's really clear, all right? It's concise, gets to the point. I put my name, a nice photo of myself, and then a little bit about me. This just comes from my website. I already wrote this a while ago, but right, this is like my interests and what I do and where I work now. And then I've created some buttons and linked to different places on the web, right? So like this is useful, right? As a person in the tech field, I may send this to someone or may want someone to see it, right? In order to work with it. And so I would love for everyone here, whether you rewatch this video or you spend some time on HTML and CSS again, to start to get the hang of it and learn more elements and learn more CSS properties, right? And learn more about the selector and how that works. And you'll see some of those examples in the source code. So I would encourage you, at the very least, to, I'm going to link to this project. Let's go to it right now, hub.com. And I'm one of those nerdy guys who has everything memorized, although I can't DC HTML, CSS, crash course. All right, so this is where the code lives. I'm going to link to the project itself. So this is the project. Let's see. Yeah, so we've got a poll coming out. May come your way here soon for what you want to learn more of. So if you want more of this, great. We're excited as a company to teach you guys more. We, of course, offer some paid options. But even for now, we do these free courses and they continue to happen. So we're excited about that. And show you the project. All right. So again, I had to introduce one new file, which is the image. And we can see how the image works, right? The image is an image tag. And instead of href, we use source, but source also just references the file. And I've gone ahead and numbered everything out. So add a container and style. And so I have the example here in the project of how the styles work. And you'll see that the selectors start to change. I use something called a class. And so if you look up class and how that selector worked, it's pretty straightforward. So this class name, site title with a dot in front of it, references a class. So I create a class called site title, all right? So again, you have the opportunity to look at this code and break it down. And as you break it down, you're gonna learn a little bit more that needs to be learned, right? Because 2 hours just isn't enough to go through everything. And so I hope that you, so I hope that all of you take advantage of this and just work to make something presentable by the end of this, right? You'll just have a little website. I can't see my menu. Here it is. So I'll paste that. Project, right? There's the link. I do have a couple of good questions, and we'll go ahead and take the last 5 minutes for questions and answers. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the thing, and I'm gonna come back here. I would show you the final slide, but it literally just says questions and answers. So there are some good questions that are coming through, so keep asking them. Someone has asked, I know a few of you are asking about learning more things like JavaScript and Python, and so every now and then we offer different courses, like free crash courses like this on different technologies. They're not consistent. They just sort of come and go when people are interested or when we're trying to talk about a new program that we're offering. And so you can definitely keep your eye out on that. And we have a meetup. So if that's something that you want to just continue to get free education, we do our best to stay in communication through meetup. I had a couple of really good questions. Let me check. Someone's asking that I'm an instructor, right, at a boot camp. Is this a good example of the speed of material? I'll be really honest with you guys. This was a slow 2 hours. The boot camp is faster paced. Now, unfortunately for me, I don't know who's here, right? I don't know what your background is. I don't know how much experience you have with a computer. And so I intentionally went much slower to make sure that everyone here at least felt comfortable enough they had an idea of what was going on. But when you get into the bootcamp program, we do speed things up. Things do happen a little bit faster, but thankfully there's more support, right? Right now it's just me hoping to help people along the way with questions, but in the classroom you have teaching assistants, you have an instructor that's more hands-on, and there's a lot less than 50 students. We limit classes to like 20 to 25 at the most. And so you have a much smaller group, which means there's more direct interaction, right? So I hope that helps.
I'll jump in on that
sure.
too. So, you know, KSU is going to be about the same size. We will have a little bit more space than we do at our Atlanta campus, for example. So we will be capping it at about 30 students. But, you know, as Josh mentioned, you'll have a senior level instructor in the room with you at all times, and then 1 to 2 teachers assistants. And then for the flex program, which is kind of, will be a little bit like tonight in that we do record it and it is available after the fact. So anyone going through a flex program at DigitalCrafts will have the ability to review material after a class is completed.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Ashley also asks about the Tampa campus. So because the way that we're a boot camp and we offer official certification when you're done, right? You're certified developer when you're finished. And so that means that the state of Florida has to approve all of that. So we're still in the process. We're not fully established in Florida yet. So if you have the opportunity, definitely go to Atlanta, come to Houston, or if you can go to KSU, that's why we're all here, right? Hopefully go to KSU and learn there. Of course, I think as of right now, things are still online, but as soon as we're all legally allowed to be in person again, it's our hope and desire that we're all in person in the classroom again, because that's our business model. We're an in-class classroom. And I believe in the near future, we're gonna offer online classes. So if you live in Singapore or you live somewhere that's not near a campus, you'll also have an opportunity to connect with us. So definitely reach out if that sounds interesting to you. We're always looking for people to show interest so we have an idea of when to start that program. I think one will start in June, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
End of June.
The end of June. The end of June is our first official online course. So we're excited for that transition. Well, not transition, just addition, I guess.
Keep up the good work.
Well, thanks. And so I do have another good question. We have another minute or so left. Immersive and flex, what's the difference? So the difference is just the amount of time it takes to finish. I don't know if it's exact, I don't know the exact comparison of hours to learning, but you learn full-time in a classroom, right? Like you're in the immersive program, you're in a classroom as long as it's allowed, right? With this pandemic, but as long as you can be, we're in the classroom 8 hours or 7 hours a day. And we're learning every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And with the Flex program, it's Tuesdays and Thursdays, as well as Saturday. So it's only 3 days a week, and it's not 7-hour sessions. They're shorter.
I can do
right?
it.
So it takes a little bit longer, right? It takes closer to 6 months or something like that, right? And that's fine because you're still learning the same material. It's still the same curriculum. I do believe that as of right now, we don't teach Python in the Flex program.
You're correct.
But in the immersive program, Python is not covered for very long. It's sort of a fundamental language. We just sort of start with it. So you're not really missing out on anything, so to speak. Plus Python it's a transferable thing. When you learn one programming language, you can catch on to other programming languages pretty easily.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you get it. So one more question from Justin. Yes, man, Justin, we're 5 years running. We're gonna keep doing classes as long as we're in business. So look out for us in 2021. We should continue to be doing things as we're doing them. So if you can't do it right now, you know, keep an eye out for us when you can. Let's see.
Add a link there, Josh, just to the website, because it will note the bootcamp date broken up by campus. So feel free to jump on and see when the next one is.
And we have amazing, Harmony's one of them, we have amazing people on staff that can answer all these questions really well. All the details and how all this stuff works. I'll just continue to iterate. I saw another question pop up. The pace or the feeling that you're getting, like, is this fast, is this slow? It does sort of change depending on the topic, and it does change a little bit depending on the person teaching, the instructor, right? So I know I'm a fast talker. I work really hard not to talk too fast. There's other instructors that are sort of slow talkers, and they take longer to get their point across on something, right? So it's very hard to give you a definitive answer on that. If this is like the same speed, is this faster, is this slower? I know for me, the bootcamp is much more fast paced. We didn't get through very much today because it's just for the very beginners. Like, here's just the very basics.
It was still awesome though.
Good, I'm glad. So I think we hit our time. We have that project link linked to you. So if you want to reference those files and finish your little project and make something kind of presentable and usable, you can say that you've, you know, start and finish something. But for now, I think that's it. Harmony, is there anything that we need to say before we close?
No, what I was going to say is I do have some helpful links to continue learning, some like free online resources. So in the email I send out when the recording comes down, I'll add that link again for Josh's project, the built out one. So you can do some tweaking on whatever you've built up until right now when we're signing off. And then, you know, some links to continue learning HTML and CSS. And then, you know, we're all remote and at home and love having conversations. So I'll put some contact info in there. And if you want to give me a call or an email, I'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about DigitalCrafts and the boot camps and all of that fun stuff.
These are the best 2 hours I've had all week.
Yes,
well, that's great to hear.
Yeah, but y'all take it easy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks all.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
Emery.
welcome. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. I'll leave the meeting open just for a little longer, but mute myself in case you want to scroll through the chat and grab any of those links between now and when the email comes out.
Thank you, guys. It was wonderful.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.